On debate, Senator Deacon, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Speaker. Colleagues, I rise tonight to speak to Bill S-253, an act respecting a national framework for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD. I stand in strong support of Senator Ravalia's bill and am personally grateful for his initiative. Immediately prior to my appointment to the Senate, I was a director and incoming chair of the Kids Brain Health Network, which supported the mobilization of research related to autism, FASD, and cerebral palsy. It was in this capacity that I first began to learn about the shocking realities associated with FASD and the isolation, risks, pain, and trauma that it visits on so many children and their families. My remarks today are focused primarily on 4 points. First, FASD is an equal opportunity problem, the consequences of which are made so much worse because of judgment and shame. Number 2, the current cost of inaction across the lifetime of a child born with FASD far, far exceeds every other intervention alternative. Third, early diagnosis and intervention are essential to reducing the lifetime costs. However, the vast majority of current evidence-based approaches and tools are unavailable to most families. And fourth, remote delivery options hold important promise and the opportunity for Canada to lead globally as we work to address the needs of children, families, and educators, and so many others affected by FASD are substantial indeed. So to my first point, FASD is an equal opportunity problem. In Canada, approximately 70% of women of childbearing age drink, and 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. We know from various epidemiological studies that about 30% of pregnancies are alcohol exposed to some degree, and most often during the first trimester, before the woman even knows she's pregnant. A recent University of California, San Francisco study found that 1/3 of women discover that they're pregnant at 6 weeks or later. This rises to almost 2/3 of younger women, and marginalized women are even more likely to discover pregnancies past 7 weeks. Simply, in committee, I think it will be important to understand the degree to which judgment and shame actually discourage versus encourage willingness to access early diagnosis and treatment for FASD in those places where it is actually even available. So now to my second point, the high cost of inaction. There have been a few attempts to calculate the cost of FASD to the Canadian economy. A CAMH researcher using a population prevalence of 1% found that the direct annual costs of FASD in Canada are approximately $1.8 billion per year. However, again, epidemiological studies have demonstrated the actual prevalence of FASD in Canada is closer to 4%. So the annual costs are therefore very likely closer to $6 or $7 billion a year. However, these costs are not concentrated in the healthcare system, as I initially expected they would be when I first started to learn about FASD. The tragic irony is that by far the largest costs associated with FASD in Canada are incurred by the justice system. Youth with FASD are 19 times more likely to end up in prison than those without FASD. The total estimated cost of FASD to our criminal justice system is almost $4 billion a year. Think about it. We spend almost $4 billion a year on criminal justice interventions involving those suffering from FASD, and we spend it because of the brain injury that they acquired while still in the womb. And it was not diagnosed, and interventions were not available. When S-253 is studied in committee, I hope time is invested in trying to identify the costs of inaction for families, schools, for these children, and for all the costs that are incurred in our social service, healthcare costs, justice, and correctional system costs. Lastly, and most importantly, please consider the opportunity costs resulting from lives that cannot and will not be lived as a result of our inaction. Now to my third point, early diagnosis and intervention. Current Canadian guidelines recommend either making a diagnosis or providing an at-risk designation for infants as young as 6 months. However, the reality is that most diagnostic clinics will not even see a child who's younger than 6 years of age. And those children who happen to be referred to for an assessment typically sit on wait lists for over 2 years because of inadequate diagnostic capacity. Children younger than 6 years benefit most from interventions that have been demonstrated to mitigate long-term consequences of prenatal alcohol exposure. Yet today, we are systematically closing the window of opportunity to virtually every child and every family. Early identification enables early intervention. The Kids Brain Health Network championed and co-funded techniques that enabled FASD-diagnosed kids to be provided with effective supports at an early age so they could reach their full potential and achieve a far superior quality of life. A much brighter, safer, and less expensive future sits before these children and families if we choose to pursue it. I hope that in committee, time will also be spent to identify and find the ways to overcome the systemic barriers that are preventing effective and cost-efficient diagnostic and treatment approaches from becoming the standard of care across and throughout Canada. Systemic barriers exist due to biases, limited resources, and limited access to technology and connectivity. And they especially include the siloing that results from the fact that FASD is not the responsibility of anybody or any group, either within or between levels of government. FASD is everybody else's responsibility, so it's no one's responsibility. Fourthly, I want to speak about the importance of harnessing remote delivery support for educators, parents, and kids. Various remote support systems and services already exist. The Strongest Families Institute is one example. Based in Nova Scotia, they deliver services remotely in Nova Scotia and in several other provinces and territories. Services like this train paraprofessionals to provide remote programming and coaching to families, helping them to deal with the issues such as inattention, impulsivity, noncompliance, and aggression at home or at school, issues that are very common with children with neurodevelopmental disabilities like FASD. As an entrepreneur who led a company that delivered an effective and cost-efficient and evidence-based reading intervention, and as an entrepreneur commercializing university-based research, and as a volunteer with the Kids Brain Health Network, I have seen far too much life-improving knowledge never, ever applied in practice. You've heard me say countless times, Canada has a phenomenal research engine, but we've yet to build the reliable transmission that will convert that research excellence into opportunities, jobs, and prosperity. In the case of neurodevelopmental disabilities, this means that kids, families, and communities are suffering unnecessarily, and society is paying a much higher cost. Kids and parents and families desperately need cost-efficient access to effective, evidence-based diagnostic and intervention tools across and throughout Canada. As I conclude, I hope that the committee in its review will be sensitive to the need to make sure that we do not unintentionally pit one underfunded, underserved disability group against another in a fight for all too scarce resources. I'm saying that as I say this, I'm thinking of Bill S-253, an act respecting a federal framework on autism spectrum disorder, passed at third reading here in the spring, and now introduced in the other place. It's a wonderful bill, but there is justifiably pent-up resentment about the limited attention and resources available to address the overwhelming needs of these families. And this resentment is exacerbated when one disability is addressed in a way that actively excludes those dealing with other disabilities. So as a consequence, when Bill S-253 is considered at committee, I hope that opportunities might be identified to help build a more inclusive pan-disability response for children and parents struggling with the effects of neurodevelopmental disabilities. Thank you, colleagues.